Florence Nightingale, very famous nurse, she made huge changes in the hospital in Scutari. Let me show you. This is the Black Sea. This is Crimea. The British and the French were fighting the Russians. The wounded were put in boats, sailed down the Black Sea to Scutari. And Scutari was the port that had a hospital there where the wounded were being taken. Florence Nightingale went to this hospital and found that the death rate was 50%. The conditions in there were appalling. There was raw sewage in the corridors. The doctors didn't wash their hands between operations. And the doctors said to Florence and her nurses, "You're not coming in here, this is men's business." But she sent a telegram to her father, who is a wealthy Englishman, and said, "Father, I want a shipload of clean mattresses, clean linen, clean bedclothes, clean bandages, and a cook." Because the food, you couldn't even call it food. Well, 2 weeks later, another shipload of wounded sailed in, and the hospital was already overflowing, so the doctors said to Florence, "All right, you can come in." And the first thing Florence did was she started to scrub. She scrubbed and she cleaned and she scrubbed and she cleaned. And finally, the boat came from England with the supplies. 6 months. In 6 months, the death rate went from 50% to 2%. When she finally got back to England, they hailed her as a heroine. I think it was Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Had a huge welcoming party. She found out, changed her name to Mary Smith, went down the back gangplank and went home. They said to her later, "Why did you do that?" She said, "I am not a heroine." She said, "All I did was increase hygiene, sanitation, and nutrition." Now, did everyone get that? That's why we can never forget Florence Nightingale. Let me show you something, and this is a graph you will never see in any newspaper or any television. Here were all the diseases: measles, whooping cough, diphtheria. Drastic reduction. Because of what? Increased hygiene, sanitation, and nutrition. And about there, they began to vaccinate. Every medical journal, history of it, will show you that graph. In fact, polio was totally wiped out. There's another graph now. It's called autism, epilepsy, cot death. It was Florence Nightingale and her increase in hygiene, sanitation, and nutrition that changed the world of nursing. I don't think the pharmaceutical companies will allow a movie to be made of her, because they would like you to think it was medication, but it was not. When Florence Nightingale read of Louis Pasteur's theory that germs cause disease, she said, "This is the theory of a man of a very unstable mind. And anyone who believes it is equally unstable because it defies reason. These microbes are everywhere. As the environment changes, now we get the exterminators." What's their name? Their name is yeast and fungus. That's what they do. That's their role on the planet. As the environment changes, now we get the undertakers. What do undertakers do? They take away dead things. What's their name? That's the mould. And it's not long after the mould stage that the matter is brought back to dust. What does the preacher say at the funeral? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. What's he referring to? He's referring to what's about to take place in that coffin. The matter will be brought back to dust. What I have drawn for you here is the carbon cycle. It's the cycle of life. And a basic law of science states that nothing is created and nothing is destroyed. It just changes form. These are the players in the cycle of life. These are the performers in the cycle of life. And the preacher's referring to Genesis 3:19, where the Bible says, we come from dust, we go back to dust, we're dust. And in Psalm 103, the Bible says, where about God, he says, he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust. Very precious dust. It's the cycle of life. And there are many eminent physicians, professors, scientists who do not agree with Pasteur's theory. It defies reasons. You see, germs don't cause disease. They're the result of unhealthful conditions. What Florence Nightingale did in that hospital was she turned the tap off. There was nothing for these guys to eat. What research is showing today, that the fumes from these things being active are very toxic. There is a series in Australia called Is Your House Killing You? SBS television had it on. 2 DVDs, 7 shows. And nearly every show, the people are sick because there's mold in their house. This stuff's toxic. In fact, the Bible says if there's mold in the house has to be destroyed. It says picked up, taken out to an unclean place outside the city. In Australia, we call it the tip. And I want to have a look at their true role in the body, which I guess we have touched on. They're the players in the cycle of life. And when everything's running well in the body, they play a very important role in the running of the human body. Now, at the time of Pasteur, there was a 6 times professor. His name's Antoine Bouchon. And he did not believe as Pasteur did. He did not believe that germs cause disease. He said germs don't cause disease. He said they're the result of unhealthful conditions. And what he did one day, he got a dead cat. He wrapped it in an airtight container, and 4 months later he came back. When he opened the container, he saw dust. We're not surprised. Maybe a few bones. What brought cat back to dust? Now, in Australia, if cat dies in the bush, well, the crows will have a nibble and the dingoes will have a nibble, and there are vultures that come in and have a nibble, and the worms will come up and the dung beetles will come up. This was in an airtight container. So what brought cat back to dust? It was the microorganisms that were an integral part of living, running cat, and death is the organisms is the ultimate self-damage. Basically, the microbes now took off their suit of clothes and put on their rubber gloves and aprons and became the garbage collectors. As the environment changes, the exterminators. As the environment changes, now the undertakers, until eventually cat is now dust. With great excitement, Antoine Bouchon put the dust underneath the microscope. It was alive with microorganisms. Remember that law of science? Nothing is created and nothing's destroyed. They'd performed their role of bringing matter back to dust, and now they're in the dust waiting for their next job. You think about it, if it wasn't for these microorganisms, there'd be so much rubbish on the planet, we wouldn't be able to walk on the planet. But they give off some pretty bad fumes, don't they? We can smell it. And what does that bad smell do to us? Remember, we're the doctor. It says, keep away. Keep away. It's like I was staying at a house when I was giving meetings in Queensland. And I looked at the little granny flat I was staying with, big open windows, tile floor, nice bed. Open window. I thought, good, I'll have a good sleep there. After the lecture, I went home, laid down. My breath was getting caught. I thought, what is it? And I thought, you know what it's like, just go back to sleep, but I couldn't. So I got up, I took the pillowcase off the pillow, and the pillow was dark yellow and stained. Because where's your face on the pillow? You notice when you buy a pillow today, it's got a date on it? You know, some people are sick because of their pillows. That's why we should regularly wash and air our pillows, and every pillow should have a pillow protector on it. And maybe you can even make it last past its use-by date if you do things like that. That's why the detective hat has to be gone, put on the head. Why are these things so? So with the pillows, I put them up the top of a cupboard, found the little cushion from the lounge, wrapped it in my scarf, put my head down, and I went straight to sleep. That's why you've got to listen to that body. So what about these microbes in the dust? Do you know they're waiting for another job? And this is why we put compost into our gardens, isn't it? At home we have 3 compost bins. One we're adding to, one is sitting while this process takes place, and then the end one, we're digging it up and putting it into our garden. When do you dig it up and put it into your garden? When there's no trace of mould, yeah? It's brought it all back to dust. And you know when it's ready, because that's when the pawpaw trees start growing in the compost bin and the pumpkin vines start coming out. Now I put it into my garden. What am I putting into my garden? Let me show you my celery plant. Now my celery plant, I've had these celery plants for a long time, many years. They keep seeding, and when they go to seed, little ones come up here. The roots underneath take the nutrients out of the soil, but there's something else that allows the roots to get to the nutrients, and it's microorganisms. So when I put compost into the soil, I'm putting the microbes into the soil that used to be in the carrot, that used to be in the apple. Remember? It brought it back to dust. You think about an apple tree. An apple tree develops a blossom. Then the blossom develops an apple under the action of microorganisms. The apple is not ready to eat. It has to ripen. And it ripens under the action of the same microorganisms. They just change roles according to the environment. No one eats the apple. What happens to the apple? It rots under the action of the same microorganisms. They just change roles as the environment changes. We do too, don't we? I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed when I'm digging in my garden. I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed on my morning walk. I'm not dressed now the way I'm dressed when I go to a wedding. We change roles according to the environment. So do these microbes. Now, in the soil, they play another role. In the soil, they break down the minerals and the heavy metals in the soil. In the soil, they also cause the absorption of those minerals up into the plant. In the soil, they protect the plant from harmful microbes that may be in the soil. They nourish the plant. Now this plant, it knows it needs those microbes. So 50% of the fuel that it makes from photosynthesis, it sends back down to the roots to feed the microbes. Beautiful illustration of taking only to give again. The law of service is written on every plant in nature. So this plant makes its fuel from photosynthesis, and 50% of that fuel it sends down to the roots to feed the microbes. It's as if the plant's saying, please stay, I'll feed you well. Because that plant knows it needs those microbes for its nourishment and for its protection. Now I'm going to take this process somewhere you may never have taken it before. When we were in our mother's utero, our gut was sterile. That means no microbes. When we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. Now last year, Catalyst, it's a show that does documentaries in Australia, they did a show called The Gut Reaction. And there was one obstetrician there, and he said, I always thought God made a mistake putting the birth canal and the anus so close, because when the baby's born, you don't want it to have anything like what's coming out of that other hole. He said, I now know it's a perfect design, because when the birth canal stretches and the baby's coming out, something else stretches It's the anus. And the air coming out of there is laden with the mother's microbes. And when the air hits the baby's face, the baby takes its first breath. What's that first breath laden with? Microbes. Interesting. Do you know they found babies born via caesarean section, their gut is lined with skin microbes? Because their first breath is from the skin. But the other good news is that breast milk is laden with microbes. You probably know those first 3 days, the mother makes colostrum, which is very thick and creamy, and on the 3rd day, then the milk starts to come through. So important that that baby have those first few days. A farmer knows if the calf doesn't get that mother's colostrum, that calf will always be a sickly calf. So those first few days are very, very important. Now, if the mother is unable to breastfeed, if the mother gives birth via caesarean section, my suggestion is that once a day the mother paint her nipple with probiotic, or if she can't breastfeed, give a little probiotic supplement to that baby first thing in the morning, because we need that gut flora. That gut flora that acts like a thick turf wall plays a very important role in the body. That gut flora is important for the final breakdown of our food. That gut flora is responsible for the absorption of nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. That thick turf wall is very important in protecting our blood from any harmful microbes that may be in our gut. That thick turf wall feeds these little cells that line our gastrointestinal tract. That's where they play the nourishment role. Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. Now you picture this. Mothers had antibiotics, which kills off some of the good gut flora. Baby's born, now baby has a compromised gut flora. What else compromises gut flora is cortisone, statin drugs, antibiotics, even ibuprofen, Nurofen, pain-killing drugs. They all eat away at the gut flora. Baby's now born with a compromised gut flora. Baby's given altered cow's milk, warmed up in a microwave in a plastic bottle, more chemicals coming in. Baby's vaccinated, another blow to the lining of the gut. 4 months, baby started to be given food, hasn't even got teeth. Another misconception. Then the second vaccine comes through. Do you know that's often when the babies go down? One lady said to me, the lights went out in my baby's eyes after the 4-month vaccination. But some babies don't seem to react. Are they the babies with the strong gut flora? Are they the babies that are getting all the right environment, the breast milk? Can you see that? And often that vaccine is just the final thread on a whole lot of other little threads. One of the things that's very effective at wiping the gut flora is antibiotics. Look at the name. Anti means against, biotic means life. What are antibiotics? Alexander Fleming, 1929. He's growing bacteria in flasks in his laboratory. He comes in one morning and they're all dead. Now he knew Newton's third law of motion: to every action there is an equal and an opposite reaction. Why is my bacteria dead? He looked in the laboratory, nothing there to indicate that it could have hurt it. He looked outside, no. He looked as the sun came in and he saw a dust coming in his window, and he looked for the source. In the next story there was an open window and there was a plate of fruit and there was a mouldy orange. Do you remember it from school days? Now that mouldy orange gives off a dust. And in that dust is its spore, but in that dust is a highly toxic gas designed to kill off anything that would compete with the mole's food source. It's almost as if the mole says, this is my orange, no one else is going to get it. I'm going to give off a toxic gas to kill anything that might try and get my orange. What might that be? Other bacteria, yeast, fungus. So that dust came in the window, settled on Alexander Fleming's bacteria and killed it. Alexander Fleming called the mould penicillium. And he called the mould waste, which is more toxic than the mould, penicillic acid. Now that penicillic acid is the penicillin we know today. Penicillin has saved the lives of millions, granted. But we've got a problem today. It's the overuse of the antibiotic and the inability of the physician to inquire why are these things getting out of control in the body. The human body can cope with about 2 courses in a lifetime. Got that? 2 courses in a lifetime. One lady said to me, my daughter had 26 courses in the first year of life. Oh, that hurt to hear that. I wonder if that little one's gut will ever recover. There's a big push in medicine today to reduce antibiotic consumption. Have you noticed? I raised 8 children without antibiotics and they're all still alive. And some of them had colds, some of them had bronchitis. What would I do? I'd wrap garlic on their feet and put charcoal poultices on their chest and let it take its course. And they all recovered. I'm not against antibiotics, but they should only be kept for life-saving. And you know what's happening today? When a person's life is threatened, the antibiotics are not working because they've become immune to them, because they've had so many. Many are sick through ignorance. We've had many people come to our health retreat with sinus problems. And one lady said, well, every time I start blowing out green, I go to the doctor and he gives me antibiotics. Do you know what that is? Do you know what that green is? It's a knock. What do the antibiotics do? Silence it. So if they come to Misty Mountain Health Retreat, I discover, wow, these people have got a gluten and a dairy intolerance, causing all that mucus. And then that mucus sits there for a while. What comes along and starts eating it? The yeast and the fungus. We had an ear, nose and throat specialist do our program. She's a specialist nurse. So she assists in ear, nose and throat surgery. She said, you would not believe the green slime we pull out of sinuses. And she said, and every specialist acknowledges that it's fungus. So what you've got to do to clean up sinuses, stop what's causing it. We get our guests to start sniffing golden seal powder, cleans it all out. Start giving the body the right conditions and it will heal. It's like one lady, she came to us a few years ago. She was overweight. She had sinus problems. She was on daily headache medication from the pain from her sinuses. I discovered she had a dairy and a wheat intolerance. Gave her the golden seal to sniff out. She came back 2 years later. She came in and I said, welcome to our health retreat. She said, don't you remember me? I said, I'm trying. She said, I've lost 20 kilos. She was about 38. She looked like a totally different person. The swelling in her face had gone down. She said, I just want to tell you that I have no sinus problem anymore. None. I never take a headache tablet anymore. She said, my mother was so worried about me because I've lost all this weight. She insisted I go to the doctor. The doctor said, that's the best blood slide I've ever seen. Everything was working well. Is it that simple? What about irritable bowel syndrome? Well, on these little areas here where there's no gut flora, there are 3 foods that are like kerosene to a fire when someone has an irritated colon. One is refined sugar, the other is dairy, and the other is wheat. Later in the week we're going to be looking at the hybridized wheat. One lady said, but God made wheat good. I said, he did. But the wheat today is not the wheat that God made. In the 50s it was hybridized. And there is a herb. There are actually 2 herbs that are a little bit slimy and they coat, soothe and heal the lining of the gut. One is aloe vera and the other one is slippery elm. Slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And I've seen people heal very quickly from that. We had a guy from Kenya do our program. He was 40. He had ulcerative colitis. That means the lining of his gut now was ulcerated. He just had a flare-up. He was on cortisone. He was on anti-inflammatories. And his favourite food was bread. He didn't have it in Kenya. And when he came to Australia, he'd been living in Australia 2 years. He sort of lived between Kenya and Australia. And when he came to Australia, what do you think he started eating? Lots of bread. Whereas in Kenya, they eat ugali, which is cornmeal. So, of course, we didn't serve him any bread. He was going to the toilet 10 times a day, and he was passing blood. So I put him on slippery elm 4 times a day. First 2 days of juices, I thought, we'll see how he goes. So on Monday, about 12 o'clock, I said, how are you going? And he's very shy and very quiet. He'd say, good. I said, how many times are you going? 4. That's amazing, on juices. Second day, how are you going? Good. How many times are you going? 4. Wow. And then Wednesday started eating. How are you going? Good. How many times? 3. Which you would understand with food. I said to him, do you know, I believe that you can stop your medication. He'd already started to reduce it. Remember, he'd go on it for the flare-up and he'd reduced it. So Thursday, he'd actually stopped the medication now for about, 16 hours. How are you going? Good. How many times? 3. Amazing. Off his medication, no pain, no more bleeding. Now, if it was you or I, we'd probably be screaming, but he's so shy. He just smiled. Every time we looked at him, he was smiling. Wow, and he'd suffered this for many years. That's quite incredible, isn't it? The other thing we got him to do was take a probiotic. Antibiotic means against life, probiotic means for life. So your probiotic basically are these Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium, and you can buy it in little powder forms. Was it that simple? Very simple, isn't it? So how do we get yeast funguses out of our body, and how do we know they're there? Well, one way is the tongue. The tongue should be pink, and if there's white at the back of the tongue which can't be scraped off, they're little fungus buds. What are the symptoms of having yeast fungus in your body? How long's a piece of string? Do you know, to date they have tested 1.5 million different yeasts and fungus, and 1,000 of those are known to cause disease in mankind. It's the mould waste that is the most toxic, and different mould waste affects different body parts. If you just Google cancer fungus, you will see a whole area come up there. So how do we get it out of the body? Number 1, starve it. What's its favourite food? Sugars. If we get someone coming to us wanting help with cancer, we even take them off fruit for 6 weeks. Because this is such an important subject, and I believe so important, and it's almost pivotal, knowing and managing our health, to know the roles that these microbes play, I have written a book on the subject. It's called Self-Heal by Design. And I think Amelia, here's Amelia, front row. Amelia's my right hand, I nearly said man, lady. And she has, I think she has some on a table out there. And the book goes into detail on how you can do this. And what I have done is I've put in more detail what I've presented today, but I have quoted many books. I'm acting as a journalist. There are many that have done the research, and I certainly quote them. So basically, you've got to stop anything that will feed it. Remember, they're just opportunist organisms. So the more they're fed, the more they'll hang around. Also, one must check the house. I'm sure there's a lot of mould activity in my compost bin, but it's nowhere near my house. There must not be any mould in the house. If there is, you've got to find out why. Never put bleach on mould. You put bleach on mould, you will create one of the most toxic mixtures on the planet and has killed people. So how do we get rid of it? White vinegar. If there's any mould in your house, you put a mask on, put white vinegar in a spray bottle, spray it, and leave the room immediately. Come back 15 minutes later and you can wipe it up. If you spray and wipe, the dust comes off, it'll go through your pores of your skin, you can inhale it. This is toxic stuff. You've got to keep away from it. And then, when you've wiped it all up, then you get a damp cloth and put something like clove essential oil and wipe that over. And then go to the phone and ring the plumber or the builder or the man that can clean all the leaves out of your gutter. You just got to find out why it is there. It should not be there. The house should be clean, dry, airy, let the sun in, keep the fans on. Right at this moment, our health retreat has closed down while I am lecturing here, and every room is shut, every window is shut, and the fans are on full bore. Is that an Aussie saying? Full on. So that when we go back next Sunday and open those rooms, they will be nice and fresh. So there's no way any yeast or mould can grow in them, because we live in a rainforest and we don't keep those if we're in those rooms, the windows are wide open, but when no one's there, so when you go away, you've got to shut everything up and have the fans on. Fans do not take up much electricity. Number 2, you got to kill this fungus. I think we've got to get away from the kill mentality, but there are herbs that will kill fungus and won't kill you. One is garlic, another is olive leaf extract. Portiaco is a South American herb. In my book I list all of the different essential oils and herbs that can kill fungus. Number 3, we've got to bring back the balance. Flood the gastrointestinal tract with the good guys, which is a probiotic. And number 4 is alkalize. The most alkaline foods you can take into your body are the vegetables. And of the vegetable kingdom, the most alkaline is greens. So green barley, spirulina. I met a man in America who had cured his cancer by just taking green barley 4 times a day. You see, cancer loves an acid environment. Mold loves an acid environment. And you've got to get the sunshine into your house, get the sunshine into your body, on your body. And number 5 is ormis. You put this into the web, you'll get a whole spiel on it. It's orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. So it's a mineral supplement, and they're minerals in a monoatomic form. And this monoatomic form, research in America is showing it can heal DNA damage. So here we are, healing the DNA damage. In my book I have a chapter on genetics, and the last page of that chapter I explain the ormis. But basically it's a mineral supplement. It's been dropped out of seawater, and it's minerals in a monoatomic form, healing the DNA damage. The human body will heal itself if you give it the right conditions. And these are the conditions that the body needs to be able to get rid of any build-up yeast or fungus that may be in the body. We've had some very remarkable turnarounds from cancer at our health retreat. We had one man come, I think it was 2 years ago now. He was Lebanese. He and his family own a huge strawberry farm in Melbourne, right down the bottom of Australia. He did not really want to come to our health retreat, but his wife and his daughter were very keen. His daughter was about 30. So he did the whole program, and we did some specific treatments helping to alkalize, gave him the herbs. He heard all the lectures and he sort of half listened. And then he went home and he rang me up 4 months later, very excited. He had prostate cancer. He said, "I've just been to the doctor and tested and I'm clear. Now he's interested. He was very blessed to have a wife and a daughter, because when he went home, they just did it. They made the food. I know what my husband's like. He's so busy all day that whatever I give him, he'll eat. Maybe not too much garlic. So that's why it's good to win over the cook in the home. And I do know some men cook, but my husband's not interested at all in cooking, but I don't mind because I love cooking. When you give the body the right conditions, healing takes place. That's the good news. I believe God meant it to be simple, and I'm so glad it is simple. Now, before we close, I do have time just for a couple of questions. Does anyone have a question? The other thing too I will say about questions is from tomorrow on we're going to have a question box. And so if you do have a question... Oh, what a fantastic team that is here. They've already got it. Okay, if you go outside the foyer, there is a small silver box with a little top. So any questions, please pop it in. There's a question there. What's the difference between sanitation and hygiene? I guess they're very similar, but hygiene probably is more in the food department. And Florence Nightingale, she said that in that hospital, the men were getting, the food was big saucepans of water with bits of rotten meat in it. So we needed a bit of hygiene in the kitchen, hygiene like everything was clean. And I guess sanitation is more applying to in the house, the bathrooms, the area. Does that make sense? Yes. There was another question, yes? Yeah, stevia is a natural sweetener. We used to have a plant stevia, and after a meal, my grandchildren would say, Nana, can we have a sweet leaf? I don't know if you've ever tasted a stevia leaf. It's incredibly sweet. And you can buy it as a powder, and it is something like 20 times stronger than sugar. You only need the tiniest little bit. So the question is, stevia is an excellent sweetener. Some people say, I don't like stevia, it's bitter. That's because they've used too much. It's unbelievable how little that you need. So it is an excellent option, yes. I've got time for just one more question. Yes? Meat or night? Meat. Yes. I will be covering that later in the week. I don't know if you're familiar with the China study. Dr. Colin Campbell wrote an excellent book to the China study, and he shows very clearly in there that when meat breaks down, it creates a very acid environment in the body and can feed cancer cells. He said that he could switch cancer on and off like a switch in his research, depending how much meat and meat products because he was doing it on rats. And the book's called The China Study because in China there is an excellent ground for research, because all the country Chinese are eating traditionally, and all the city Chinese are eating what Time magazine called the meat sweet diet, which is high sugar, high meat, and how the country Chinese, cancer hardly known of, and yet the city Chinese, the cancer rates are up to the Western countries. So thank you for your attention tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know tomorrow night's meeting? Okay, tomorrow night is diabetes. Now, tonight we'll be looking a little bit more detail at food. So if you have diabetes, this is an excellent meeting for you. If you don't have diabetes, this is an excellent meeting for you, because you will never get diabetes. And the good news is it's totally conquerable. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Now, before we close, please bow your heads and I'll say a prayer in closing. Thank you, Father in heaven, for such fantastic information about this amazing body that we live in. I pray that every head bowed will be inspired to look at their body a little differently and make steps to treat it well. This is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.